Hello mathematicians, I hope by the end of this video you can say I can find the domain and range of a relation. The domain is all possible inputs of a relation and the range is all possible outputs of a relation. And it's a little bit, there's slightly more nuance than just inputs and outputs because it's all possible inputs and outputs for domain and range. So say for example we were to have the relation y equals plus or minus the square root of x. So this relation here would be like, it would take an input, which is x, and it would go through this plus or minus the square root of x, and it would produce an output, which is y. Now just from looking at this, so all possible inputs. So let's this graph right here, the graph of this relation would look something like this. So this is what this relation looks like. So all possible inputs. So let's see, can there be any negative inputs? Well, it doesn't look like it. There's nothing on this graph over here. And if you look at it, can there be a negative square root of something? No, that gives us an imaginary number. So all possible inputs, so the domain of this function, I'll put it down here, the domain would be all values that are 0 or greater. So you could say from 0, including 0 to positive infinity is how you could notate that right now. And the range, well, these arrows mean it's going to slightly keep going down forever and ever and ever. And it's going to keep going up forever and ever and ever. So that means that its range is from negative infinity to positive infinity. Or you could say all real numbers. Or you could say all real numbers. Again, that could be represented using this Blackboard R if you want to be fancy. Let's do one more example of actually a function. Let's find the domain and range of a special relation, which is a function. So let's find the domain and range of the function sine of x. So I say f of x equals sine of x. So again, it's going to take this input, which is x. It's going to go over here through this function. So this function sine of x, and it's going to produce an output. And what are all possible inputs that can come in here, and what are all possible outputs that can come out of here? So the graph of this function is going to look something like this. So we see that all possible inputs, so this is going to just keep going up and down forever and ever and ever, and it's never going to stop. It's going to keep going up and down. It's going to keep going over here to negative infinity, keep going over here to positive infinity. So the domain is all real numbers because anything can be put into it. All real numbers. Or again, you could do negative infinity to positive infinity, or do that Blackboard R right there. It's up to you. And its range, we can see right here, is that it never is going to cross this line right here. It's never going to cross this line, which goes across that one. It's never going to get above that, and it's never going to get below this line right here, which is that -1. So that +1 and -1. It's going to keep just touching it and going up and down forever and ever. That's what a sine wave looks like. So its range is from -1 to 1, and it includes -1 and +1, so we're going to use these brackets right here, so from -1 to 1. So that is how you can find the domain and range of a relation. You can also see this represented via input-output mapping or something like that. Let's actually do a quick example of that right here. And actually, before we get to an example of an input-output mapping and finding the domain and range using that, let's just do an example of just using just a graph without giving any sort of equation or anything like that. So let's say we have this graph right here. So if we were to look at this graph right here, we can see that it starts at -1 on this x-axis on our input. Remember, this is our x-axis and this is our y-axis. So our x-axis is our input. and it goes all the way to 2, but it does not include 2. So our domain for this would be, our domain would be from -1, including -1, because this is closed now, from -1 to 2. And we're going to do the parentheses there because it does not include 2. Because there's no arrows here. If there are arrows made, that might mean that it goes on forever and ever and ever. But because there's just dots here, it comes to an end. Okay, and then our range would be from, well, it starts at 0 and it goes up to 2. And again, it does not include 2. So our range would be from 0, including 0, up to 2, not including 2. So we do the parentheses right there. So that is just an example of just given a graph. We're not given any sort of equation or anything like that. So the domain and range of this graph would be, so the domain would be from -1, including -1 to 2, not including 2, and the range would be from 0 to 2, and again, including 0, not including 2. So now let's look at an input-output mapping and try to find its domain and range. So looking at this input-output mapping, all our inputs are right here. So you can see it goes from here to here, from here to here, here to here, right? So it goes from our x to our y, so our domain of our input right here. So our domain, so all possible inputs given by this input-output mapping. I'm going to put these in little curly brackets right here, 0, 1, and 4. And I'm going to put commas between them because we don't necessarily know. Is it 0 through 4? We don't know. From this input-output mapping, we just know that the inputs are 0, 1, and 4. So we put commas between them. And our range would be from, well, we got -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So pretty easy from an input-output mapping. So it'd be -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2 would be our range. I hope by now you can say I can find the domain and range of a relation.